Greetings everyone, Nate the Frog Painter here, and in this video we're going to be painting up the PlagueBurst crawler, and we're going to be exploring some advanced weathering techniques and some advanced pre-weathering techniques as well that can also be applied to any of your miniature painting, whether this is a Death Guard miniature troop or any of your other painting such as an Ultramarine, anything like that. I'm sure you can take a lot of these techniques, alter the colours and apply them to your miniature painting. So the first thing that I'm going to cover are some pre-weathering techniques that you can apply to any of your miniatures that'll give it a little bit of spice and some more realistic looks. Now for this one, with it being a Plague Marine or something from the Death Guard, I wanted it to have a really corroded texture. It's already got a bit of corrosion built into the sculpture, but I wanted to take that a little bit further, and one way that I love to do this is with some putty. Now I've used Tamiya basic putty and I've thinned this with the Tamiya basic cement. So that is the Tamiya cement, the extra thin cement, and I've used that to thin the putty a little bit. But you can also use other products such as like the Vallejo putty, or liquid green stuff's really good. Liquid green stuff's a little bit more safer and it doesn't really smell as strong as the basic putty does have a little bit of, the Tamiya one does have a little bit of a strong scent to it. But the liquid green stuff, if you know you want something that's a little bit more safe and that you can thin with water, I'd probably recommend doing it with the liquid green stuff. But it's just a case of getting some in a little bit of a tin, and then thinning it with whatever product that you've got, whether it be the liquid green stuff with the water or the extra thin cement, and then I come onto the miniature and start to stipple this on using an old brush. Now the goal here is just to rough up the texture a little bit, where we're going to have some green, or you just want a little bit more corrosion, and we're just going to work our way around. And I'd sometimes, for like the heavier corroded areas, I just come in and stipple like a second layer on, but just work your way around with an old stiff brush. Any cheap brush will do off Amazon or your local hobby store, or just even an old knackered brush that you've got, and just start to work your way around and stipple this on. Now you want to give this ample time to dry, but check your products that you're using to see how long that takes to dry before I then come in with something like 2000 or 3000 grit sandpaper. You'll notice in the video for the demonstration, and this is a completely different miniature to the tank, as for some reason that footage got destroyed, so I had to do it on the something else from the Death Guard just to display this. Now the reason I'm going over it with sandpaper is because what it's going to do is it's going to buff out a couple of those imperfections. So if you've got some areas that are a little bit too corroded, it's just going to flatten those out a little bit. And what's nice about this, especially on steel textures, is that it's going to give it that more of a cast iron texture or a rolled steel texture, and it's just overall going to make your miniature that little bit more exciting as we go along. After I've done that with the sandpaper, I then come in with a sharp tool. Now this could either be an old airbrush needle, a paper clip, or some sort of sharp tool that you might have, and just add some additional scratches and weathering to the miniature. Now on its own, this sometimes can't be enough, so the texture putty isn't enough of the texture that we want. I wanted some more heavier corroded texture, especially with this being like a PlagueBurster. And for this, I've come in with some Citadel's Typhus Corrosion. Now the reason I've used Typhus Corrosion is, one, the particles and the granular effect that's inside are on the smaller side, which is perfect for this type of miniature. And I've just applied this and stippled it in very lightly. It's quite easy to go overboard with this, so less is more, if that makes sense. And I've applied this to the heavier corroded sections just around the miniature, and that's pretty much it. And actually you can see I've added a couple of kit bash elements to this model, such as chains or barbed wire, or just some general like skulls and stuff that you can get from Citadel. That bit is entirely up to you. Now for priming, there's a couple of ways that you can do this depending on the primers that you like to use. I'm going to be using a chipping method a little bit later on in this video. So for that, I need a brown rusty base coat. So I've primed my miniature in a brown primer. I've used the VMS no peel primers that go through an airbrush. However, they do sell, and there are a lot of companies that have alternative brown primers. So if you want to find a brown primer, this one's very similar to Rhinox hide, and it's just a case of spraying that on there and away you go. I would recommend doing doing this in sub-assemblies as well, such as the side mount guns. I've removed them off and I'll glue them on at a later stage, and also the front scoop or the guard that would be, you know, coming along and trudging through. But the brown primer is quite important. If you don't have a brown primer, you can just prime this in black and stipple on some different varying browns just to get a nice rusty base coat. Now the first colour that I want to come in and actually paint onto the miniature, again you can use any of your favourite dark steel colour. Because I'm applying mine through an airbrush, I'm using Vallejo Metal Colour Exhaust Manifold. Now this is a paint specifically designed for airbrushing. It's one of my favouriteest colours. It's a really dark steel. These metal colours tend to dry a little bit more on the glossy side, which is perfect for the metallic elements, but I'm just working my way around any areas that I want to be metallic, such as the engine and the tracks and the wheels on the tracks. I'm just spraying these on, and I'm not worried at this point about any overspray at all. If anything, it's going to add a little bit more realism to the miniature once we start to chip through it, as some of the corners will just appear a little bit more on the metallic side rather than a rusted side, which is not a problem to me. So I'm just working my way around with this exhaust manifold and just spraying it on to the miniature. It's a fantastic, beautiful colour. Probably one of my favourite darkest steel colours that I love to apply through an airbrush. It is extremely thin. When you get these, they're almost like water, so they go through an airbrush with no thinning required, like a dream. And you may require maybe 1 or 2 different coats. If I've missed any areas, or if I'm using like applying it and a little bit of that rust is showing through, I'm not bothered at all. I'm just going to leave it, and that can be one of our rust colours. But give that around 10 to 15 minutes to dry before we move on to our next stage, and I'll be talking a little bit more in depth about the actual chipping and the main colours. So for the next portion of this video, I'm going to be walking through and talking you through the actual chipping method and the actual base colours and the main colour of the actual miniature itself. Now the main product that I'm going to be using for this chipping effect is the AK Heavy Chipping Effect. Now if you're not familiar with this product and how it works, or what it is that I'm going to be walking you through, I'll give you a quick rundown in a nutshell. There's 2 types of chipping effects. There's the worn effect and the heavy chipping effect. For this one, I've used the heavy chipping effect. However, the worn one is absolutely fine. It just creates some smaller chips. But essentially, what we're going to be doing is adding the most realistic chipped effects. What you are going to be doing is applying a base tone to this miniature, like the base colour or the main colour of the miniature. And then we're going to be chipping through that to reveal the rust brown tones underneath, and this will give you the most realistic chipped effects that you can possibly imagine. However, there are some little nuances and some little things that I do need to go over before we do get into it. So the first thing that I'm going to do is put this product into my airbrush. You don't need any thinners or anything like that. It's thin enough to go through the airbrush without any additional products or thinning required. We're going to apply this to the entirety of the miniature, or the areas that we want to paint and chip through. So in this case, it's pretty much the full tank, or if you were doing a Space Marine, this will just be like your armor sections. And I'm applying this in 2 thin, even coats. Then what we do is give that around 15 to 20 minutes to dry. Don't use heat. Whatever you do, do not use heat to make this product dry, otherwise it'll set it and it'll be pointless trying to do what you're trying to do, so it'll just make the actual solution ineffective. You'll know it's sort of dry because it'll leave like a satin glossy sheen to it, and there'll be no like puddles or puddling. But the best tips I can give you is just work your way around it with your airbrush. And unfortunately, it does work best. I've seen people do it through a brush, but it does work best through an airbrush for that even coverage. Now, once that is dry, what we're going to do then is apply our base coat above that. So you're going to create a layer in between your rust tone and your base coat that when you hit it with water, it's going to reactivate and peel that paint or chip that paint that we've applied over the top of it, such as the green. It's going to take that back off, revealing that brown primer underneath. So once we've applied the actual chipping fluid and given it around 15 minutes to dry, or use the air from your airbrush, I'd sometimes use that to speed it up slightly. I'm then going to come in with my first of my green base coat colours, which is Death Korpse Drab. And again, I'm applying this through an airbrush at around 25 psi, just building it up slowly of those layers and just working my way around the miniature. Now, one thing you don't have to worry about with the chipping fluid is overspray, such as the metallic work that we've just done, because we've sprayed the actual chipping fluid atop of that. It'll act almost as a mask, so that when we come in with our water to reactivate that middle layer, it'll just pull it straight back off the tracks or any overspray area. So you don't need to worry about that. If you've applied it correctly, you'll be able to simply scrub that straight off. Now, as an additional highlight, just paying a special attention to points where the light would hit, such as the center of the panels, or like panels that you want to be a little bit brighter. I've then come in with a second coat of the Death Guard green as an additional highlight. Again, at this stage, do not use heat for this to dry. Either let it dry naturally, or you can use the air from your airbrush to dry that. Now, work your way around the entire miniature. If you've got something large like this, I tend to break it down into sections. So I've done this front panel, or like the scooper, as I like to call it. I've done that first, and then I worked my way around the actual tank itself. You get around 40 to 60 minutes of working time with the chipping fluid. Again, it's going to get a little bit harder the more that we go up. So if you're a little bit slow with this, or you're new to it, I'd probably recommend doing like a panel at a time, or like half at a time, before moving on and not being able to chip through the other half if you've taken your time and it's dried and set. So let's just quickly recap what's just happened. We've got a rusty base coat, then we've applied our chipping fluid atop of that, and that's going to act as the layer in between. Then once that has dried, we've applied our main base coat colours of the Death Korpse Drab and the Death Guard green, and then at this point we can then move into the actual chipping itself. Now, to do this, it's really simple. All you need is some old brushes, or like a paper clip or something like that, to add some additional scratches if you want to, and some water. Now, depending on which brush you use, I'd recommend, maybe doing a test piece if you've never used these products before. But you'll find that different varying pressure and the amount of water that you use does alter the chips. Now, we do want to remember that we're working in scale, so it's no point just going in there and attacking the chips and making them massive, because it is a little bit uncontrollable, this product. But with like the knowledge I'm going to share here, and maybe if you're doing a test piece, you'll start to figure that out, because it does react a little bit different with different paints, such as like the Citadel. These tend to be quite easy to chip through, but if you're going to use something like AK, that is a little bit harder than your other ones, or the Tamiya products. The Tamiya paints, they do chip through nice and easy and quick as well. So just depending on the paints and stuff you use, it might be worth doing a test piece. One of the best brushes I can give you a tip for are these like makeup brushes. It's almost got a normal brush on one end, and on the alternative end, it's almost like an airbrush cleaning brush. So if you've got any of them lying about, that'll work well as well. But I just go to my local stores where women had purchased the makeup brushes from, and you can tend to find these brushes. It's almost like what they do their eyelashes with. So if you can find one that's very similar to that, these brushes work great to get those in scale tiny chips. And then I can quickly flip it to the other end where the normal soft brush is, and this is where I can start to make the chips a little bit bigger, or just refine them a little bit more. But all I'm going to do is dip that in water and start to come in and attack the areas that I want to chip through, which will reactivate that chipping fluid in the middle layer, peeling that top coat off, revealing the brown coat underneath, and giving you the most realistic chips that you've ever seen. If I'm working on a larger area, it's like this tank, what I tend to do is load up my airbrush with just some standard clean tap water, and I spritz that or spray it across the areas that I'm going to be chipping through, and then I come in with my tools. But I find that I can't stress enough how it is to start off small with the makeup part of it. That's really good at getting some little in scale scratches and stuff. Then I'll come in with and flip it over to a normal brush and start to adjust them or make it bigger, and then I can come in with like my tool, like a paper clip or a needle, and just add some additional scratches. But I know it's a lot of information to take in, but it's quite an easy process. It's just 3 stages, and then you can just reactivate it and start to chip away. Some little tips I can give you is pay attention to areas that are naturally going to be a little bit more chipped than others, such as the front guard. That's going to have some major chipping because that's scooping and hitting all the rubble. Any areas to the lower half of the tank or places where would naturally be exposed to more corrosion or just getting banged and dinked up a little bit more will suffice for that. So again, let's just quickly recap what's just happened. We've applied our rusty base coat, we've put a chipping fluid on top, let that dry, put our paint or our base colours on top of that, and then once that's dry, we've come in with water and our brushes and tools to start to chip away and just work your way around your miniature. Again, this doesn't apply just to the Death Guard, so don't think you can watch this and then, oh, how would you do it on an Ultramarine? It's the exact same, you're just going to change the base coat colours. So after that, and this next step is optional, and it does require a little bit more knowledge around airbrush and airbrush control. So this is what I like to call pre-shading or pre-panel lining, something along those lines. And what this is just a case of using something like contrast paints or washers. So for this I've used Dark Oath Flesh because it's got a nice little rusty colour, and all I'm doing is just really thin lines of shading around the miniature. So it's going to darken up some areas, it's going to add a slight little rust tone to it, and I'm using a 0.2 needle and nozzle. I've got the Evolution, but if you're after a good airbrush, I've also got links to a Mobius by Gallery, and these will get 10% off as well. So you can see here before and after, it adds a massive amount to the miniature, and you can go in there and add some like pre-streaking or some, I'm just essentially adding some shading to this miniature, but more concentrating around panel lines and some streaks. And you can see the massive difference that this step makes. You can do it with oils and enamels, but it just helps those stages come along. Now at this point we're just going to base coat out the rest of the additional details on the miniature. Now I've used Scale 75's Decayed Metal as a base coat for the bronze sections, and then given them a dry brush of Battle Axe Bronze by 2 thin coats. This is just a colour match of Runlord Brass. And then for the skulls, I've just gone in there with like a lighter brown tone and then a bleached tone atop of that, just to base coat out the skulls. And any other additional details around your miniature you want to base coat, so if they've got any lenses or anything, you might want to paint those in. Or if you've opted for some helmets or some additional details, just a case going in there and painting those in the colours that you desire before we move on to the next steps. And now we're going to get into some of the weathering and fetching this miniature and its decay to life. Now these next few stages to complete our miniature are going to be some weathering steps. Now the first one that we're going to add is some more panel lining, some more concentrated panel lining, just to separate those panels, give the miniature some more shadow and contrast. And we're going to do this using a mix of oils and enamels. Now ultimately you could go straight in here, give everything a unifying wash of something like Villain Inks, Goon's Grime, wipe it off, and you're pretty much good to go for like an army painting. But I want to control mine a little bit more, make everything and the details pop that a little bit more as well. Now I've not applied any varnishes, there's no varnishing or anything like that required to apply these oils or enamels. I'm just using them straight from the pot or the tube and just mixing them with some mineral spirits just to thin it and to be able to manipulate and control them. Now because I'm going for that more controlled application, what I've got here is some Villain Ink Decrepit Filth, and this is a really dark brown, almost black enamel. Now I know these are not available just at present at the release of the public. Some people have been able to get them if you got hold of the tester kits. However, you know, if you're wanting to substitute something similar to this, you could just go in there with Villain Inks, Goon's Grime, and it'll work just as well. But for that extra contrast, you could also use like just a really dark black enamel if there's any more on the market, or alternatively, you could thin down some Abtalon 502 Smoke, which is almost a black oil paint. And now what I'm doing is coming in With Zoe, I'm going to do a pin wash. I'm not being super neat. I'm just allowing it to naturally flow into the recesses because, again, we don't need any varnishes or anything to make it do that. It just will. But you will get these sort of bleed areas where it sort of feathers out a little bit onto the surrounding areas. Now, I like that. I actively encourage it. But if you do want to neaten it up, so by the time you've worked your way around the miniature, the first point of contact when you first started is going to have dried. Now, if you do want to neaten up some of this bleed effect, I don't personally do it, but for some areas I do it a little bit if I just want to control it and nip it in a little bit more. And because we're using the Orza enamels, unlike an acrylic where once it's on, that's it, with these we can start to reactivate and manipulate them with the mineral spirits. So I just get a tiny bit of clean mineral spirits onto my brush and start to push that shadow or that bleed effects back into the areas that I want. So you're just basically going back around and cleaning up any mistakes or just refining those little lines and shading and bleed areas a little bit more. And if you do find that some areas want darkening up, you can just splodge a little bit more of your enamel or your oil into that section and you are good to go. Now give this again around 10 to 15 minutes to dry and then you're good to go with the next phases of oil paint. So speaking of oils, these next few phases is me just literally having fun with oil paints. If you've never experimented with them or played with them, oh my god, you can really have some fun, and you'll see throughout these next few steps that I am just playing, manipulating it and just getting it to how I want it. So I'm using methods of like oil washers and oil filtering. I tend to use the Abtalon 502 oil paints. You could do this with enamel, like rust tones, but I've just got some oil paints just, you know, so I can manipulate them a little bit more. And all I'm doing here is some oil dot filtering. So I've got some different brown tones or rust tones around the miniature, and I'm just dotting these in different places where I want the rust to be, especially around some of those chipped areas. And then what I'm going to do is come in with a clean, dry brush, just slightly moistened with mineral spirits, and I start to buff and work these and blend them into the paint. Because we can reactivate them and we've got tons of working time, the possibilities of these products and the ways you can manipulate them are absolutely endless. So I'm turning some into streaks, I'm just making some more of a filter, and I use a mix of like buffering them and blending them, and you can get tons more control, and they're so forgiving that it's almost a really cheap and easy instant gratification way of painting in a sense, whereas you'd have to do this over multiple layers with acrylic tones and making sure you're getting those blends and those glazes properly. With these, there's no hard work required. You can just literally have a little bit of fun with them. I might go back in there with some additional streaks just to make some areas pop that little bit more. But again, this is just you playing and having fun with them. I'd recommend probably jumping back to your test piece if you're not sure of how to manipulate these. But you literally can't go wrong. If you're making a mistake, you can just get some mineral spirits and wipe these straight off. Now, whilst we're on to rust, and just to really make those rust elements pop that little bit more, and overall just add some different tonal variation, you do get a little bit of a different look with this product, and of course that is Dirty Down's Rust. Now, if you've never used this, it is literally magic in a bottle. It's amazing. You can just control it with water, and just by applying it thickly or thinly or adding a bit more water to it, you can get some massive tonal variation within the actual product itself. So I've just got some of the Dirty Downs loaded up onto my brush, and some tips for Dirty Downs Rust. I've done a couple of videos, so I'd highly recommend going and checking them out on the Dirty Downs Rust to be able to get the best from this product. But I'm just working my way around some of the more corroded areas. Don't go mad with this. Don't apply it to every little bit of rust that you've just done, only to the most corroded areas that I'm applying the Dirty Downs Rust effect. And whilst we're on the subject of Dirty Downs Rust, Dirty Downs also do a product called Dirty Downs Verdigris, and that is the products that I've used on some of the bronzy sections of the trim and the rest of the miniature. So anywhere where I want some verdigris, I've applied that product as well. It works exactly the same as the Dirty Downs Rust, or it's just obviously a green product or a green pigment that's in there that works very similar to the Dirty Downs rust, and this will give you a really nice verdigris effect as well. And finally, we come to the last weathering stages on this miniature, and that of course is adding some splats and some additional weathering to the lower half of whatever it is that we're painting. Now for this, I've used a mixture of some different paints, and again going back to some oil paints. First of all, I've got some like thick mud or some thick mud texture paste, and what I've done is applied this to the lower half and especially the tracks. I get a stiff old brush, and again like a paperclip or a airbrush needle, and I just start to speckle and flick this around the track areas, showing that some of that mud you know, really tying it into its environment. And of course there's going to be a lot of dust and dirt and grime build up on those tracks as well. So to complete that, I've gone in there with something like Absalom 502's Dust or Villain Ink Decayed Death and just splattered this around the lower half and the lower extremities of the miniature as well, just to, you know, tie it into its base or whatever scheme there it is, and it creates some additional natural weathering that would really occur on these sorts of vehicles. And that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. So just some closing thoughts. Now I know this has been more of an in-depth video. It's pretty much a bit longer than what I've previously do, but I hope you've been able to take something from it and either some inspiration or just some additional products. Now I know I've talked a lot in this video, but we haven't actually done that much to this miniature. You know, we've done a couple of different base coats, we've applied some weathering products and some additional products on top of that, like the chipping effects and everything like that. But you can sort of see how just with minimal effort that the sort of pieces that you can create from it, especially the difference that such as like the pre-shading done with the contrast paints that can have onto your miniatures, and the pin washing and tying everything together, plus with your actual weathering products. It looks and seems a lot, but in reality I've not actually done that much to the miniature. You know, there's only a fair few steps and stages to this product, but the end results and how you apply them is completely different, and it can just overall improve the look of your miniatures. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have, make sure you do hit that like button. Again, I've got all my affiliate links below and the paint list, so if you want to grab some of the products that you've seen in this video along with the miniatures, then make sure you are checking out my affiliate links below. It just helps me get a little bit of a kickback. But if you're new to this channel, please make sure you are a subscriber, and until next time guys, I will catch you in my next video.